Hi, I'm Rami from Fidelis Cybersecurity. I lead the R&D team. Okay. All right. So I lead the R&D team for deception at Fidelis Cybersecurity. And I'm going to talk about intelligent deception and how to use intelligent deception in order to catch sophisticated attacks that are already inside your network. So a few words about Fidelis, who we are. Established in 2002, headquartered in Washington, D.C. Among the awards that we won on 2017 was Gartner Cool Vendor for Deception and Gartner Visionary for DLP. The Fidelis Elevate platform is built of 3 modules that work together in order to catch the attackers. We have Fidelis Network that monitors basically everything on the network, going into the deep packets, going into the data to understand. Fidelis Endpoint running on the endpoint, monitoring file systems, monitoring memory, registry keys, things like that on the endpoint. And then Fidelis Deception, what I'm going to talk about today. Fidelis and EXATEL, we're working for almost 4 years together. This is a couple of use cases. Fidelis is running on the EXATEL, using the EXATEL SOC, and these are a couple of use cases that are published in our blog in Fidelis Security that were together with EXATEL written. One was a case study on detection, another on browsers, Chinese browsers that were being used. So if you want, you can go to the blogs at Fidelis Security and read more about these. So I'll start basically why deception? Why do we need more tools in the environment? Why do we need something like deception to work in your network? And the answer is that there's no 100% prevention. No matter what you have in your network, you have firewalls, gateways, proxies. No matter what you have, there will be things that will get in. You will have attackers. You will have third-party tools that have their own vulnerabilities. You will have partners and customers that you can't always rely on what's going on their networks. And there will be employees that either intentionally or unintentionally let malware into the network. So no matter what you have, there will be infected assets in your network, and the goal is to catch them. The goal is to find them as much as possible. If we're talking about the dwell time, how long an attacker sits in the network, studies show that it's usually months before someone can identify them. Usually it's not even someone from the same company, it's someone external that identifies that some malicious piece of tool is running in your network. And during that time, basically it's doing whatever it wants. It's walking around the network, it's getting your data, it's retrieving information. So why do we need to take an offensive approach, or what's the goal of such an approach? First of all, to illuminate the network blind spot, to catch those hidden areas that you have no visibility to, areas that you have maybe legacy IT, old things that usually the security team are not even aware of. It could be areas in the cloud that you don't have enough protection. It could be areas in your network that were deployed, all kinds of IoT devices that you usually don't have enough security for those type of situation. We want to deal with APTs, 0 days, deal with a lot of unknown things that are going on in the network. So you want something that's not based on signatures, that's not based on a set of rules, but actually something that's more active and it's more appealing to an attacker in order to attack. And finally, this is the main goal, why we want more things, or why we want something like deception. You want to minimize the infection to resolution time. You want to minimize the time from the point that your network was actually hit, that something is going on in your network. You want to minimize the time until you catch that and until you identify that to stop it. So what's intelligent deception? What's our play on what we call intelligent deception? And I'll start with the basic elements of deception when we talk about deception in a corporate network. So on the left here, you have a typical network, some data servers, a couple of VLANs, you have the internet, the firewall, the main switch. On the right, you have how the network will look together with deception. So deception has several elements that are placed in the network. They're basically decoys and breadcrumbs. Decoys will be servers, endpoints, real assets, real machines, pretending to be real machines or real assets in your network. Now, they're not real computers. They're at the end and the back, on the backbone. They're emulated services, emulated information. But to the attacker, this looks like real web servers, real decoy endpoints, real data servers. The next thing is the breadcrumbs. Here we show in a very small view. We'll get into details a bit more what that is. But breadcrumbs are pieces of information that we put on your real network. It could be on your real assets. It could be on your real Active Directory server. It could be traffic that's going on the network. It's fake data that we put on your real network, and the goal of that data is to lure the attacker, push the attacker from your assets, from the corporate assets, to the deception elements. Now, deception, if you heard about honeypots from a long time ago, they've been around for maybe 15, 20 years. Basically, the goal over there is, let's put something in the network nobody's supposed to know about. Nobody should access it. Nobody should even be close to it. So anyone that does access it, it's a malicious attack. And if we go to the attack lifecycle, this is a typical attack lifecycle. There's infection, download of tools, and then there's everything that's going on inside the network: mapping, discovering of resources, lateral movement, data retrieval, and exfiltration of data. If we go to the attack cycle together with deception, when deception is installed, basically we're dealing with everything that's inside your network. So the mapping of discovering of resources, we have breadcrumbs that lure the attackers from the real asset. We give them more information about the deception asset so they can find information. We have decoys that are activated and they interact with the attacker while he's doing lateral movement and while he's trying to retrieve data. The goal of the decoy is to distract the attackers, to cause him to waste time, to cause him to download false information and to exfiltrate that type of information while we catch him from almost the first second that he's there. So a bit about the challenges of intelligent deception, or in order to have an advanced deception solution, what are the challenges that you have? There's authenticity, adaptive, automatic deployment, scalable, and to keep a low attack surface. Authenticity is everything that regards to the making the decoys look real, making the deception elements that you place in your network blend into the network and be part of that. You don't want to have a Windows user network and then have a couple of machines that it's obvious that they're not part of the network. You don't want to put your Linux servers together with your Windows servers. You want to have the deception blend in. You want to put traps that are relevant. You don't want to put FTP traps on an HR site if there's no chance that this corporate or this person has a chance of using FTP. Adaptive, a main thing to remember about networks and corporate networks, that they change. No matter what you do, whatever you place today, they will change. You'll add more computers, you'll add more infrastructure. If we're talking about the cloud or we're talking about IoT, so it's going to change much more and much faster. The goal of deception is to be adaptive, to always monitor what's going on the network and to deploy the right type of deception and to adapt that deception as the network changes. Automatic deployment, you don't want to spend a lot of time, and if we go back to the honeypots from a while ago, it took a lot of time to build a machine that will look real, that will blend into the network. What we can show, and we'll see a bit in the demo, you can deploy hundreds of decoys in a matter of minutes. Deploy them all over the world once you deploy the initial sensors. So it's very easy to automatically deploy and automatically scale. So if you want to deploy in all of your network, you don't want to take a long time for each decoy to be deployed and for the breadcrumbs to be deployed. And finally, low attack surface. This is important, especially when you deploy more and more elements in your network. You don't want to increase the attack surface. You don't want to create another point of vulnerability inside your network with your security tools. So our approach to this is to not put, of course, real machines in the network that will act as decoys, but actually to do emulation of services. So we're pretending to act like services. We're pretending to have data. We're pretending to run a Windows or a Linux or a file server or a web server, but it's not really putting more vulnerable systems in your network and not putting more agents on your endpoint in order to lure the attackers in. So if I summarize the approach that we take, our deception offering at Fidelis, it's built of 3 engines. Traffic analysis, intelligent deception, security visibility. Traffic analysis is basically to monitor everything that's going on in the network. The goal, and we'll see this at the deployment flow, the goal is to understand the network so we can build the proper deception. And for that, we need to see what's going on, the operating systems, the data that's going on, other communication channels that are going on, shadow IT, tools like this. You want to have all this information in order to build the right kind of deception. The intelligent deception is the deploy of the decoys, the lures, the breadcrumbs that we talked, and then we'll see other types of breadcrumbs, either network-based, registry keys, files, or actual information that you can put on other tools like Active Directory. And finally, security visibility. When we go into the demo, we'll see some of the views that we have. The goal is to have, besides to use the information to understand the network and to deploy the right deception, but also to have a full story of what's going on when there is malicious activities. So if we're tracking an incident or tracking something, we want to know everything that we can do. If we have an attacker that interacted with the FTP server, we want to know what username he used, what password, what files he tried to download, where he tried to traverse, what else he did, who else did he talk to, what else is going on. And this is something, we'll see it deeper in the demo. But this is very helpful when you want to do forensics investigation and understand what's going on. A few words on our deployment architecture, how it looks from a network level. So we need to connect to a management NIC, of course, to get the UI, of course, but also to connect to the SIM, to the proxy, to the mail server, to connect to everything in your network. We'll need a mirror port in order to monitor the traffic, a tap or a span, so we can see the real traffic that's going on. And the decoys that are deployed, they're connected. You can put them one in each server room. They're connected to a trunk port. The trunk port allows us to do hundreds of VLANs and then thousands of decoys above that from one machine, from one actual NIC. Okay, the next few slides will go into step by step into the deployment. And we'll start with the first step is basically sniffing. Identify your asset. We want to know the network. You want to understand the network in order to build the right deception layer. For that, we're looking at the network. We're looking at the subnet, the assets, the operating systems, the ports that they open, the services, the data that they have. We want to know if you have Windows 7 with IIS 7 on it, or if you have Ubuntu with Apache or Ubuntu with another web server. We want to know exactly what you have on what ports, on what data, so we can deploy the deception that matches that. All the organizations, let's say each organization will have its own stack, will have its own machines, its own different types of network. And our goal is to know as much as we can based on the traffic analysis in order to identify that and build the right kind of deception. There are cases, of course, where we don't have visibility to all of the network. In those cases, you can also upload additional information if it's a result of a scan, if it's data from your VPN or things like that. So we can always get additional information, but there's no real, the main real value is to get the network as much as real time, so we can identify things, see as they change. The next step is to deploy the decoys. Deploying the decoys in your network, so if this will be your typical network, we'll start to deploy the decoys. We'll set them automatic based on what's going on the network, like I said. So you have the decoy HR near the HR web server, the decoy windows near the windows, the data servers near the data servers, and so on. The goal is to spread deception in all of your network, to put it in every subnet, to have it in the right work group. If it's a FTP server, we want to also have the right file systems. If it's a web server, we also want to upload the right web pages to it. Like I said, it's an adaptive, ongoing process, so it's always going to monitor, and we'll always adapt the decoys and change them as the network changes. The next step, and here we go to the more interesting steps with regards to deception, deploying the breadcrumb. It's actually to make the decoys interesting, to make them attractive to the attacker. So we'll start with the breadcrumbs that we deploy. Breadcrumbs are real information that we put on your real asset that lead to the fake decoys. So they can be cookies, registry keys, files, links to recent documents, FTP, credentials, things like that. So an attacker, if he doesn't want to make noise, there's the noisy attacker that comes to a computer. He'll hack the computer. He'll go scan from there the entire network, and he'll try to brute force everything. The more advanced ones, they won't do that immediately. They'll actually try to see what's going on, what information do they have. So if they have access to one computer, they'll see, okay, let's see what this guy recently did. Where did he browse? Where did he, what FTP servers he had, what SSH sessions do we have? Do I have any credentials on this computer that I can use to go to my next hop? And that's the goal of the registry keys, of the breadcrumbs. We put the information on the endpoint, so the attacker that reaches that, from that point on, he'll go to where we want him to go. Another type of breadcrumbs or deception trap that we have is network deception. This is basically pushing all kinds of fake network information that will cause the decoys to look more real and to look more vulnerable. It could be decoys that are communicating with the DNS server, the web server, decoys communicating with each other. It could be all kinds of packets that we know that there's all kinds of attackers, if you're going to repeaters and responders, that they catch, man-in-the-middle attackers, that they catch in the middle, they try to intercept traffic. We know that they're looking for all kinds of activities, so the decoys will send all kinds of activities at random times to make them look like they're real machines, that they're worthy of attack. The next step of deployment of deception is Active Directory deception. This is, I think, one of the cooler things that we did. We finished this in the end of last year. We deployed a layer of deception on the Active Directory. And here, this is for, again, advanced attackers. They don't want to make noise. Some of the tools that you can download them online. They're open source, Bloodhound, Sharphound. There are all kinds of tools that what they do is they quietly traverse your network through the Active Directory. So they get the information using, sometimes they don't even need any credentials for that, but basically they'll go to the Active Directory, enumerate it, see what's going on the Active Directory, and use that information for their next hop. So what we're doing here with deception, first of all, we define some fake users. We create some fake users on the Active Directory. These fake users, they appear to be interesting, they appear to have information on them, but really they don't have any privileges to do anything. But that's something that you can't really see because we play around with the GPO and the permissions of that. So the first thing, we put the fake users on the Active Directory, and then the decoys will actually use these fake users and communicate with the Active Directory. So now if someone's looking at the Active Directory or looking at the network, they'll see decoys, they'll see machines that look real, they'll have real data, they'll see them communicating with the DNS server, they'll see them communicating with the Active Directory, and they'll see them registering login attempts, successful login attempts to the Active Directory. So anyone enumerating that, all of a sudden there's more information on more fake information, both for decoys and for users, that's leading them to the decoy. Because the goal, our goal is basically to catch the attacker when it interacts with a decoy, when it plays around in your network, and this is more ways to push the attacker to it. So the final step is, again, because we're monitoring the traffic, we're always analyzing the traffic, we're interacting with the attackers. This is just some of the protocols and data that we're going on. We're basically looking at almost everything on the network. And then when there is an attack, and we'll see this in the demo, all the information, all the internal traffic, so you have a full story of what's going on. I'll summarize the approach. I won't go into all of these details, but basically the deception approach is to discover your network, deploy the breadcrumbs, deploy the decoys, deploy the breadcrumb, distribute them throughout your network, and if you have a big environment, you have all kinds of sites all over the world, all over the country, we'll deploy the decoys in each one of them, detect the attackers, and adapt. Always adapt, to always change yourselves as the network changes. So next, I'll do a demo. It'll be few minutes for a demo, and then I'll go back to a few slides. All right, so this is the basic system, the basic environment, how it looks like in a typical environment. I'll go into two different flows. One is to investigate information about an incident. I'll dig into the information. I'll show you all the information that we have from the point that we identified an infection and what other information we have on the machine, on the network, and what's going on. And then I'll do the other part. I'll show you basically how to configure deception and how easy it is to use all the information that we're showing on the asset and on the network in order to configure deception in a few clicks. So I'll start by going into the malicious activity. I'll go into one of the infected assets here. So I click here, there's a FTP, yeah, you see it, okay. There's an FTP incident here. I'll click in, I'll go to the asset page, and here I basically have all the information that we have on the asset. This includes information about this specific attack that we're investigating, and we'll dig in, we'll open the FTP manipulation attack. And here, under the story of an incident that someone accessed the FTP server, we can go into the details of what really happened. See, it's a bit hard to see, but if you imagine it, the basic events here, that we have everything that's going on an application level. So we have, if he tried to enter with a username, we'll show you all the username. You can see that here. the actual username that he tried to get in and the actual password that he tried to use when he got into the FTP server. Besides that, we have any file that he read or any file that he wrote, anything that he traversed. So basically everything that this guy did on an application level with the FTP server, we're monitoring, we're registering, and we're presenting that. The same thing, if this is a web server manipulation, this is access to a web server of the Decoys information as well. The user agent, the headers, the URL that was browsed, everything that's interesting from the attacker perspective. And the same for SSH. Basically, any service that we emulate, because we're emulating the service, we have full control on what to do with the attacker and full control to report anything. So SSH, we can control how many logins until we let him in. We can, by default, we let him guess the password after a few times, and once he's in, we let him use that password in order to interact with the SSH server. The same goes for FTP. If we let him in by a trapped credential, by breadcrumbs that we spread out, then of course we don't let him guess the password because he already has a key or a password, and then he can come back in. So this is the examples of incidents that we have. It can also be other traffic-related incidents where we have everything that's going on, all of the information. I'll show you a bit more of the visibility information that we have, and this is based on the traffic analysis of what's going on. So we have the internal traffic, everyone that this asset communicating with, everyone that was talking to this asset, and we can follow that. We can from here go to other assets. We'll click on here. We'll go to other assets that are interesting in order to tell a full story, because we're investigating an attack. We want to see what's related. We know that it's related to FTP, so we want to know what else this asset is doing with regards to that. We'll show you the incoming traffic, what's going on, outgoing traffic, if there's anything interesting. Here we see some mismatch of IP and port and things like that. We'll show you other known communication channels that are being used. This could be other tools, if it's shadow IT tools, if it's antivirus tools, if it's other type of tools that are they may be good, they may be bad, but usually the IT will want to approve the usage of them. So we'll show you those. And we can also show here, it'll be hard to show here, but basically we can also show you traffic recording. Because we're looking at the traffic, if an incident happens, we can start recording, and then we'll show you all of the traffic, everything that's going on this asset. So when we show you the incident, we show you the story, we can also back it up with more forensics information, not just the information about the alert, but also everything else that happened on this network, on this asset. So this is basically the investigation of an incident from one asset. We can go from here, if you think of the information that we have on one asset, I can show you how it's all aggregated together to the environment of basically everything that we know about all the assets. So this will be all the shadow IT tools or all the communication channels, and then you can see exactly which asset has what. We can show you the networking servers that are being used, the FTP server, SSH servers, anything that's interesting with regards to that. Internal traffic, who's communicating to who, but now on a whole level of the network. And the most interesting information is when we go into the environment tab. And here I'll zoom into the grouping by operating system, and I'll start from this point. So here now basically we have an understanding of the network, we know what's going on, and our goal is to define the right deception for this network. Now in the graph here, you see there are two, well, you don't see it completely, but there's a green graph and a black graph above that. The green graph is the real network, and let me turn off the black part. This is the real network, this is how your network looks. These are the breakdown based on operating system. And then the graph above that, here you see it here a bit. This is the deception. This is how the deception is deployed. And again, our goal is to have the deception be part of the network. So this was a breakdown by operating system, but we also have it by the roles of the computers, the role of the assets that you have, and if you have IoT devices, by the type of IoT devices, if you have printers, if you have cameras. We'll show you your network on one side, and we'll show you how the deception is deployed on the other side. Now, when we start to deploy the deception, we'll go from the subnet tab. This basically allows us to deploy deception per subnet. And we have a sort of a progress bar for each subnet that the main columns are deploy the decoys, then deploy the breadcrumbs, then spread the breadcrumbs on the assets. When we want to deploy the decoys, we're using all the information that we already have. So it's very easy to deploy a decoy. Basically, we click here. It tells us how many decoys do you want to deploy, how many additional decoys. Let's say if I say I want 4 decoys, all I need to enter besides the number of decoys is valid IPs that can be used. The system, because we're looking at traffic, it could suggest IPs that appear to be free. You can use that, or you can decide that you want to use your own IPs. Once you do define the IP, basically that's it. I'll click Save here. The checkbox here means smart auto generation, meaning generate automatically the content of the decoy based on how the network looks. And again, as it changes, adapt the decoys. We can also decide that we don't want to auto generate, but we want to do it manually. And then we have some more information. Do you want to generate a computer or an IoT device? So assuming I want a computer, I need to choose what type of computer. Do I want it to be a database server, a web server? What do I want it to be? Let's say I want it to be a file server. And then what type of operating system? And then you have a list of operating systems that we emulate, Windows, Linux, different types of flavors. And then that's basically clicking Save here will generate this type of decoy. The same thing if I go to IoT device. Again, this is, if I do it automatically, it's based on the traffic. It'll find you have HP printers here. You have a Xerox camera here. Let's define the right decoys here. Let's define the right decoys here. But if you want to do it manually, then it's okay, choose what you want. Let's go with printer. And in printer, choose what vendor do you want. I want HP, an HP printer. And then depending on the vendor, what we have, in this case, you have several flavors of HP printers that you can deploy. Each one of them will actually mean, when they're deployed, it'll mean that you have a decoy that looks exactly like this type of flavor, this type of vendor with the right information. So it'll have a valid SSH portal for some types of printers. It'll have a web page. That's basically the same web page of the camera. So that's basically the deployment of decoys. I'll go in maybe a word or two to deployment of breadcrumbs. When we deploy breadcrumbs, we're actually putting the false pieces of information on the real assets that will go to the decoys. What we have here, so we already know how your environment looks. We know how your decoys look. So when we want to click to deploy breadcrumbs, the system will suggest what type of breadcrumbs are worth creating. And each breadcrumb, for example, this is an FTP breadcrumb. It's hard to see, but an FTP breadcrumb that actually matches this service on a decoy. So we suggest this to be, and the same for other ones, if they're SSH or core FTP or other types of traps or breadcrumbs. We're basically going to tell you, okay, this is a breadcrumb that should lead to this decoy. Let's configure it. And once we configure it, again, it's as easy as clicking Save here. What we get is a script. We get a generator script, and then that script could be run either manually on your machines. It could be run using GPO if you run it on your domain controller. And it can also be run if you have any other SCCM or any other distribution mechanism to run on your endpoints. You can use that in order to deploy the breadcrumbs. Of course, if you have the Fidelis Elevate endpoint solution, it'll automatically push it to that, and we can use the endpoint solution to deploy, but we can also deploy it with any other mechanism. So that's basically the step. I'll go from here. Basically, I'll go from here back to the presentation, finish the final few slides. So that's how we deploy the deception. A bit about some use cases, some customer stories. I won't go to them in details, but we have one example. This is an interesting example of a bank that we were protecting. And we met them at one of the conferences a few months after they were deployed. And basically they said, the deception, your tool was in the network. It was quiet for so long. And then after some time, all of a sudden it started to report high severity alerts from an infected asset. They tried to monitor, tried to understand what's going on. They couldn't find anything on the asset, even when they ran all kinds of antivirus and advanced tools on it. And basically, they saw that it was communicating with their decoy. They didn't know what it is. Only after they ran the traffic recording for 24 hours, they actually caught the process. That was, it was, at the end, it was a home infection. Someone took his laptop home. His kid played some game, downloaded some some tool that was basically using information in the corporate banking network in order to access a decoy web server that nobody's supposed to even know that exists. So that's one of the stories from a bank. In healthcare, basically, I'll take this, just the final part here. The interesting thing they had here, they had, it was two hospitals, the hospital that we were protecting and another sister hospital, that they had a network that was pretty much shared with a firewall between us, but we found that there was a lot of malicious tools on the other network that wasn't properly protected, and they were just going through because the rules on the firewall were very, let's say, very not severe, and basically anything that they allowed almost anything from the other network. We were able to find all kinds of processes that scan, that try to look for assets, and to do all kinds of shared resources, to look for shared resources in the network. And another example, this is a technology company that we worked with, a big one out of Chicago. The interesting thing that we found here was bot activities of an assets that were using HTTP traffic in order to monitor all of the other assets in the network. It was a legitimate IT tool, but he basically said, you're the only security tool that was able to properly identify this. The tool was basically scanning the other computers over HTTP, uploading information from them, and uploading it to his Amazon account. So it was an okay tool. But the fact that we were able to catch it, identify exactly what it is, that was a big part of helping us get this account. Some other use cases that are interesting with regards to deception, lateral movement detection, curious insiders, third-party tools. So again, decoys, they sit in the network. Nobody's supposed to know about them. Any access to the decoy, it's something that should be investigated. It's a malicious case. Sometimes it's a curious user, but in other cases you see that it's a tool that's not supposed to do it, or it's a real infection. We found cases of stolen credentials. So we found cases of a regular user trying to, looked around the network, he stumbled upon a decoy. It was an SSH decoy, he tried to interact with them. And then we saw that he was using all kinds of passwords. We saw that he was using the admin passwords for this corporate environment. So basically there were two things here that forced them to change their passwords on their network, but the user was not even supposed to know about the admin password, and here we're seeing that he's using credentials that maybe he got from IT, maybe he somehow got, but he's actually using it. And the second thing, he's basically authenticating in front of a server that he has no knowledge about and giving him the real credentials to his to their environment. So that was an interesting catch over there. With regards to man-in-the-middle attacks, this is a nice way to use deception. There's all kinds of attackers in the network that basically they sit and they listen. And one of the ways we have to catch them is that we have the decoys publishing all kinds of noise. One of them is, the protocol is LLMNR. It's basically a protocol. Every time that you open a command line or a browser on your Windows machine, you start typing. So let's say you want to go to CNN.com. When you click C, already your computer is sending a lot of information around the network. Who knows what C is? And then you do CN. The computer will say, who knows what CN is? And then the CNN will do, who knows what CN is? Now, what repeaters do in the network, they sit in the network and they wait for things like that. And then they say, once you start typing your CNN, they'll say, oh, I know what CNN is. Come authenticate, and I'll give you the information that you want. What happens in the background in these cases is the user is not even aware, but the attacker in the middle is basically saying, come authenticate in front of me, and your Windows machine will automatically do the authentication. It'll send your token to the attacker in order to say, here, I can access, you can help me in. And this is one of the things that decoys can catch, because they publish the noise that basically say, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. Nobody's supposed to respond to them. Definitely no one's supposed to say, come authenticate in front of me. And when they do that, you see the full attack flow on the UI, and it's a very nice test case to show in an environment. Ransomware, basically, we all know ransomware and the way that it goes around the network. The decoys can catch them while they're trying to do the lateral movement, and they can also catch them if the the breadcrumbs are properly deployed. You can catch them when they try to encrypt the files that are on the remote system, which are actually decoy files. So if we put on the registry keys, or if we put on the recent document list files that are on the shared folders that are on the decoys, basically an attacker follows that, and you catch him when he accesses the decoy. And we talked already about cloud on IoT. Maybe this is the final slide, the main value at the end of the Fidelis deception. So the first thing, the main thing here that we want to do is early detection of infected assets. We want to reduce that dwell time of malware in your network. Once he's in and he's doing basically whatever he wants, there's no real security tools that can really catch it and do that's not signature-based without knowing about the attacker. And this is one of the things that deception really does well, because it basically sits there and it waits for the attacker and it helps the attacker reach it. No false positive. The design of deception is no false positive. Of course, you can't say no false positives at all because you'll always have a curious user or someone that traversed the network, which is maybe not a malicious attack, but every attack of deception is something that should be monitored, should be identified, even if it is at the end, it's a user that, okay, he just browsed around. You can see that very easily in the UI. Let's say if someone typed a wrong IP, which is okay, he got to a decoy. Okay, so that'll be a low severity alert because he only pinged it. He only reached it once. But then you'll see that he's actually checking what's over there, and maybe he's scanning the ports, and then he's starting to interact more and more with the decoys. So you'll see the difference between a regular user that just stumbled upon a decoy and left it alone, and between the users that are actually trying to get in, trying to see what that server is and trying to get more information. Fidelis deception is the only deception solution that's giving you comprehensive internal network traffic analysis, a real understanding of what's going on your network, automatic and adaptive deployment. This is something, again, among the deception vendors, we're the only ones that really constantly look at the traffic, constantly monitor it, and are able to automatically deploy the deception, and unparalleled security visibility. And we saw that, but basically, we try to give you all the information that's relevant. So when there is an attack, we tell you the story on an application level of the attack, of the attacker, what he did, how he got in, what else he did on the network. So there's really a full story, and you can really understand and do something with the information, and not just get a long list of alerts and then say, okay, what am I going to do now? And finally, we have integrated incident response with other Fidelis modules. So if we go, the Fidelis Elevate platform has the network solution, the endpoint solution. When you combine the three together, you can basically take information based on deception and do what they call playbooks, for example. So if this type of attack happens, let's block this and let's isolate this asset. Let's block its communication. You have all kinds of incident response that we can do currently with the Fidelis network and the Fidelis endpoint product. But we can also integrate the Fidelis deception by itself, can also integrate to almost any other SIEM, to Splunk, to other third-party tools to send information out, and also to receive information from it. I think I did this slide. This is the couple of blogs that we did at the beginning. It's at if you go to Fidelis Security blogs, you can search by EXATEL. There are a couple of use cases specifically talking about the environment. And that's it. I don't know if we have time for questions or no questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much.